Coming up on the GeoHabari podcast.
Working with APIs and data fetching. Now this is more or less like a back-end side to front-end development, because how APIs work is they help you fetch certain types of data that you would want your users to be able to see or users to be able to use, You have to pay more attention to JavaScript, because now after JavaScript, there's now the beautiful part of front-end development, the frameworks that you get to use.
If your code could speak, what would it say about you?
We're here to amplify African tech stories and elevate technical brilliance. This is the GeoHabari podcast with Yariwo Kitio. Hi guys, welcome to another episode of the GeoHabari podcast. This is the Tech Stacks and Architectures series. We have intentionally curated this series to take us on a learning journey to understand the individual building blocks of powerful tech stacks that make geospatial technology tick. From programming languages, databases, softwares, cloud infrastructure, and so much more, we feature individuals sitting at the very core of developing these systems end to end. Welcome to the Tech Stack series.
We are back with episode 2 of the Tech Stack series, and I'd initially mentioned that the Tech Stack series is aimed at giving us a clear picture of the different roles that exist within the geospatial value chain from back-end to front-end and what these individuals actually do. Episode 1 was around data pipelines with Alan. This is episode 2 with Valentine, and we're going to look at GIS development and specifically front-end development. And I'm so really excited about this. I think when we started this series, the entire goal was to understand if we put all the GIS roles on a table, like in a jigsaw, where would all these roles fit? And that's why this series exists. It's for us to understand how the different roles come together to create these very powerful use cases that we see every day. When you open an app and you see a map, when you open a web browser and you see a map, and you see all these fancy things happening. Who did that? How did they do it? What is their title? What is their job description? And do we want to get into that space? So yes, I hope you pick that from this particular series. Allow me to introduce our second guest for this series, Valentine Irungu. Valentine is a GIS developer with Planet Management Group, which is a global engineering firm. She is also a founder of a geospatial community, GeoCode Connect Kenya KE. I'll also plug that in the resources for the podcast description as well. And you can always plug into that community to just sort of, again, connect and make as many networks as possible. Allow me to welcome Valentine Irungu to the GeoHabari podcast. Hi, Valentine.
Hi, I did I do that? Woo, 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 woo. Thank you so much. Okay, I was saying just a POV, I would really love to appreciate the developers who've come ahead of us. This is just a disclaimer because I'm also, as much as yes, I'm a geospatial developer, I will say that I'm not a full expert, or rather a genius in this field, but I will try my level best to give out the information that I have. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me here.
Thank you, Valentine. And before we get into the conversation, maybe we can start with, I probably might have left a few things in your intro. And I know there's so many other amazing things you're doing within the community. And so maybe in your own words, maybe you can briefly introduce yourself and what you'd like the audience to know about what you do and what you're really passionate about for you as a person and as an individual.
Thank you. So Valentine is someone who's always believed in hard work. She believes in working smart. She believes in being consistent and also learning continuously. Yeah, as you said earlier, I'm a founder, of a community known as GeoCode Connect Kenya. My co-founder and I, we thought of why not form a community that brings together geospatial students all over the country. And we started it last year in Feb, and right now we are up to 800 people, and we are growing in numbers every single day. So I love that people believe in us. I try my level best to bring the best people in the field to talk to these people, to try and encourage them, because we've been there, and holding each other's hand. I felt like that's something we need to do. So
Thank you so much, Valentine, and congratulations and for the amazing work you're doing with your co-founder. You guys are doing an amazing job at the community, within the community. I want us to get into today's conversation. I normally like starting our conversation with quick fires, two random quick fires that's linked to the Tech Stack series. And so the first one is, if you could pick one tool as a developer, one tool that you would pick as your fighter for the rest of your life.
Oh my God. One tool. And I'm wondering because in dev you're always using all tools are core. It's like, how do you even mention it? Every tool has its own purpose. You can't do without the other tool. Should I say GitHub?
That's such a smart choice. I would never.
Oh my God.
That's such a smart choice. GitHub.
Because I feel like with GitHub, I'll be able to know what people are working on as much as I don't have the other tools. I'll be able to see the collaborations that are happening out here. Like literally, I feel like in my dev side, I'll just think of GitHub. Plus, it's also cloud-based. So
Yeah. You've answered that very strategically. Okay, number two, the second question. If your code could speak, what would it say about you?
I'm an overthinker.
Okay.
It would say I'm an overthinker because I feel like I love I love keeping my code clean. And I'm not the kind of a person who just writes codes just to write them. And at times it's a disadvantage because you end up finding yourself wasting a lot of time on a certain sort of a code. And maybe you should have broken it down into smaller chunks. So for me, I really overthink so much. I'm like, it has to be perfect. But funny enough, nothing can always be perfect, but I'm always that kind. Yeah.
Thank you for taking those. That gives us a very good runway into this tech stack
Yeah.
conversation.
Mm-hmm.
So for a
Mm-hmm.
start, Valentine, when we talk about the GIS space and all these different roles that exist, I'm curious to know first for you, what was your entry point or your inception point into deciding or, picking front-end development? How does that come about?
I love that question because it brings me way back to campus, right? I remember when I joined first year, I met one of the people. He's called Jay. He's such a brilliant mind, honestly. So we get into campus, the first JS meetup we have with these people, like from the club. And these guys show us a lot of codes. And I'm there so intrigued. I'm like, oh my God, what is happening? There's nothing you actually understand, but you're like, whatever they're doing, I want to do that. From that day, I decided to follow up. I was able to interact with Jacob, and he was able to familiarize me with a couple of development sides in JS, right? So it was more of, it's like there's data analytics, there's building now the front end side, there's also the back end side. But that time, in campus, you're so stranded because you don't know which side to go to. And I feel like this is a big challenge that people go through before they pick a certain tech course or a certain tech career path to go with. So how I got to front-end development is because I was in JQuat, we had this curriculum where there was coding in it, right? And I remember there are times we will do web mapping, and web mapping entailed a lot of front-end development. I remember even the first web maps we built there, I can't really term them as really good web maps. It was just writing like 5 lines of HTML and just key or rather pasting your leaflet map there. It looks like a good front end part, but it wasn't. So I remember now, fast forward, when I got out of campus, I was so torn between data analytics and front end development. But I promised myself that I'll do both so that I can be able to weigh my options and know, will I now take front-end development or will I go with data analytics? Because both of them is sort of align with what we do in geospatial, right? So I have always wanted to study with ALX, and that's where I got to apply for a course. I remember my first option was actually data analytics. So when I was applying to ALX, okay, data analytics was there because now there's also data science and there's also data analytics. So you have to choose between both of them. And I was so stranded. So I knew in my mind I wanted to do data science. And since I didn't see it there, I was like, let me just take front-end development and just roll with it. And that's where I'm at right now. So I decided to take front-end development and roll with it. But I believe that with time, I'll also get to do data analytics now. Once I'm done with the program, that's how I got into front-end development, honestly.
And thanks for painting such a clear picture. Sometimes
Yeah.
the path is not always linear. Front-end engineering, and just to bring perspective to the audience on what that looks like. So from when you talk about front-end development, what are these typical things that a front-end JS developer does that we probably may not be aware of, or we know, but we don't know that's a front-end developer role?
Yeah, I love that. But one thing I would love the listeners to know is you need to first of all understand what generally front-end development means. Because once you get to understand that, you can be able to know how to integrate it with JS. Because now with front-end, JS is just, but I'll just say integration part, to be honest. So what I'll actually define, let's say what a front-end developer does is they're responsible for creating and managing the user-facing part of a website or even web application. So in layman's language, I'll term it as, imagine yourself logging into Google, right? What you get to see on the Google page, now that has been built on front-end development. So front-end development is more of creating the visual, or rather, you're the person who creates what is to be seen by a user. And you're the person who's supposed to make what is to be seen by the user interactive. I don't know if that sort of answers it. So you get to Google. The first thing you do when you get to Google is, maybe I want to know what JS is. I get that search bar. You get to type in, what does a JS developer do? And it brings you a couple of information. So I personally am a user getting into the Google webpage. So the webpage itself, now what you're seeing has been built on front-end development. The search bar, the writing Google. Just think of it as writing a composition. When you write a composition, there's the heading, there's the paragraph, you know. Now in front-end development, you have to add things like text, links, videos, images. You've seen such kind of web pages. So that's basically front-end. Let's say you want to build a weather dashboard. How would you want your weather dashboard to look like? So you're the one who is responsible in creating that interface to make it pleasing to the users. The first thing the user sees when they get to a website, that's now the front-end developer's part. Yeah.
When it comes to a tech stack in a front-end development world, what are the technologies you work with, the tools that, like the combination of them, before we even try to figure out how they come together? What does that look like if I'm to get into your world? And are you able to paint a picture for us and for the audience as well?
Yeah. So as we've talked about the tech stack, this is basically the technologies that you get to use, the tools you get to use, the frameworks you get to use to build the user interface that you're supposed to build, right? So when you talk about these technologies and tools, the first thing that as a front-end developer you work with is something called the version control. You've heard of Git and GitHub. So Git and GitHub, think of it as when you're always coding, you're always making changes to your code. So every change brings out a new version of your code, right? Personally, every time I'm creating my code, I have to always push my work to GitHub, right? And this is a very beautiful practice because every time you hear people being told you need to create your portfolio, no matter a newbie you are, you know, and it all starts with you pushing your things to GitHub, right? So first of all, a person as a front-end developer, you need to get your own GitHub account. It's an easy thing to create. There are so many videos on YouTube on how to create it. So there's GitHub and Git. So Git basically helps you maneuver your changes and provides you the different versions of your code that you get to build. So in any case, I get to work on a certain code and I don't like what I have done, I can be able to go back to my previous version and start again from there, you know? And then for GitHub, we talk about GitHub being a cloud platform where now think of it as, you see how Google Drive, you get to store all your information. the things you don't want to lose track of, the things you don't want to lose, from your local disk. So GitHub is more like that, right? You get to push your codes there for future referencing. This is how you get to build your portfolio, to be precise. And then the second of all, there is now the languages that you get to use to build your user interface. Now you get the HTML, the CSS. Something I thought I would tell the audiences that they need to know is that HTML and CSS are not programming languages. You might be lying to yourself. I also did. I lied to myself saying, I'm learning HTML as a programming language. It is not a programming language. Even the tech gurus will tell you that. So with HTML, it's more of a hypertext markup language. And HTML helps you now build what you see. It's now with HTML, you get to put in the text, you get to put in the images, you get to put in the videos, So without HTML, there's nothing you're going to see on your web page. And now for the CSS, look at, you remember when you're talking about the icing, that's the icing top thing, Now that's CSS. CSS now makes your code, or rather your web page, looks beautiful. It's in charge of beautifying whatever you're writing. It's in charge of beautifying your user interface, making it appealing to the people who are going to be using it, right? Then from there, there's now the JavaScript. So JavaScript more or less is now a programming language that helps out in the interactivity of your web page. Have you seen those web pages where you get to be asked to log in your details, your name, your email address, and all that, right? So JavaScript is in charge of the interactivity, where you get to type in your name, where you get to type in your email address, your contact info. That's the interactivity part of your web page. So I've talked about version control, I've talked about HTML, I've talked about CSS, there's also JavaScript. And funny enough is HTML and CSS, you need the skills. You need to know how they operate. You need to understand how these languages are brought into play, how to actually write them. Because now, after understanding, that's just like an eighth of what you need to know in front-end development. What really intrigued me about front-end development, I used to think it was an easy thing. Let no one lie to you that front-end development is easy. It is hard out here. It is really hard. Let no one lie to you. After you've actually learned the basics of HTML and CSS, now when you get to JavaScript, this is now a very core language in your web page, because now it helps you now. I've talked about the interactivity, right? But it also does a lot of things also behind the scene, because after you've keyed in your information, let's say in a form, right? You get to a point where you haven't filled a certain information. There's always an error message that comes in play. So now all this is now JavaScript. JavaScript is a lot. So you have to pay more attention to JavaScript, because now after JavaScript, there's now the beautiful part of front-end development, the frameworks that you get to use. Because now with JavaScript, there are a couple of frameworks. I don't know if you've heard of people talking about React, people talking about AngularJS, people talking about Vue.js. Personally, I've just worked with React for now. And for CSS, the framework I've used, there's Bootstrap and there's also Tailwind CSS. I would highly recommend Tailwind because, hey, it makes coding sweeter, to be honest. So there's that. Aside JavaScript, another tech stack is working with APIs and data fetching. So now this is more or less like a backend side to front-end development, because with APIs, how APIs work is they help you fetch certain types of data that you would want your users to be able to see, or you would want your users to be able to use, So that's another part of front-end development that's also there. What other tech stack? I think I'll be able to talk about APIs as we go on, hopefully. There's also development tools. So now the development tools, this involves now which code editor are you using, right? I don't know if you've heard of Visual Studio Code. I don't know if you've heard of Anaconda. I don't know if you've heard of Sublime Text, But for me, the best one is, personally, from my 2 cents, whatever I use Visual Studio Code, because with Visual Studio Code, you can be able to connect it to your GitHub. So every time you're doing your work, every time you're working on your code, you can be able to directly push your changes now to GitHub. So yeah, so far there's that. And I think finally on the tools and also the technologies to be used and everything else in front-end development is the deployment part. So when you talk about the deployment and hosting, this is when, after you've now built your project, or rather your web page, right? You have to put it in a place where people can now be able to access it. So we have things called servers, we have places where people get to host their stuff. So we have things like GitHub pages, because with these things, you just give them a link. You tell them HTTP, maybe www.pataplaces.com. Then you just give them that link and they'll be able to access it. So there are places, or rather there are services that get to host your web pages for other people to see. So I think for now, that's mainly the biggest tech stack I can actually talk about when it comes to front-end development. Yeah.
And so let me go back. So there's this thing I like doing, which is like connecting the dots. So I'm trying to connect the dots between the different roles that exist and how you work with the other roles. Our roles don't sit in isolation, right? There's
Yeah.
other roles we are dependent on. And as you're speaking, my head goes back to Alan's episode, purely talking about him is purely focused on data pipelines, right? It's not, he doesn't do anything from the front side of it. I'm trying to think about the relay that happens between the back end and the front end. What's that interaction like? Integration on the work that happens between the front end team and the back end team.
Okay, so I think I can now give use case scenarios here, right? So a typical workflow is, number one, I don't know if you've heard of UI UX design.
Yes.
I don't know if you've heard of something like that, right? So the first step to all this is normally getting to understand and gathering your project's requirements. So this is where you get to understand what data do you need, what functionality the end user requires, the overall design expectation as well. So this is where your UI UX design, or rather the skills apply. So for UI UX, you get to design. So let's take, for instance, a client has come to me, or rather, let's say I'm working on my own project, right? And this project I would want to portray, I would want my webpage to showcase maybe all the hospitals in Kenya, right? I'll sit down. First of all, I will design how I'd want my webpage to look like. So that's where UI UX design comes in. And this is where you get to use things like Figma, things like Adobe XD, things like Sketch. They help you come up with these designs. You need a design first. You need to sit down also with your clients. They need to tell you, this is how I want my design to look like. So you come up with just a mock-up of what needs to be created. And now you, as a front-end developer, you get to transform now the mock-up, or rather the prototype, into code, So the first step is now understanding and gathering your project requirements. And this is where now the UI UX design comes into play, because you end up coming up with a prototype or even a mock-up of what is expected. Then after that is now when you get to build your interface. So here you don't really focus on so many things. You now build on how you'd want the whole interface to look like. You don't waste your time on funny things. You just build. You're just building, let's say, because how a proper website normally looks like is, you will have a header section, you will have a main section, you will have a footer section. So in the header part, you will have now the navigation part, where you get maybe the logo, you get the links, let's say the home page, the about section, the contact section, and all that, right? So there's always a structure. So you build your code in that structure. Then from there, you can get to now style whatever you've built. you've now created your user interface the way you wanted it to be created or how your client wanted to be created. Because the whole ideology about front-end development is that you're here to please the users. It's not even about the clients, it's about the users. How do I make this web application be suitable for people who are older than us, maybe people from the age bracket between 60 to 80, you know? That's now the whole ideology about working on front-end development. So UI UX design is very key. So you've already built your interface, now you're styling it. You're adding the cherry on top of it, right? You're making it look beautiful and everything. Now we get to the part where the back end now, where it comes into play, right? So let's take, for instance, I want now the health data, let's say the hospital data. I'd want to come up with that. So probably there's an API, let's say OpenStreetMap, they have an API, right? So you're able to access all the hospitals in Kenya. So you can be able to fetch that data. You can be able to write code that will be able to fetch that data from their database using now the API, you know? So that's where the integration comes in. So you get to fetch data from their database and you get to use it. There's also another way where on the reverse side is you personally, you've been told to key in information about, let's say, your name, let's say your user login details, right? Whatever you submit will go now back to the backend and will now go to the database side. Right? So that is how the integration is like. So there's the interacting with the backend. Now this is where the front end typically needs data from the backend. And that is where you get to have the API in place. And then there's also the side where now you as the persona, you get to push now your data to the backend side. So yeah, so I think that's really clarifies the whole ideology. I don't know if it's really understandable from that end.
It is. It is.
Yeah.
I feel like you've given us such a clear understanding of what that looks like.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I should call them. I know earlier you talked about, and I really like the point you made on
Mm-hmm.
front-end development, talking about GIS and front-end development. GIS is just an
Yeah.
integration bit. It's not
Yeah.
it's the entirety of everything that exists.
Mm.
A small component that is
Yeah.
pushing in addition to what your client needs or what needs to be surfaced. I'm wondering when it comes to, I don't know if there are nuances or complications that come with GIS integrations when it comes to the front end side of it, as opposed compared
Mm-hmm.
to a typical website that has no GIS functionality, that as a front end developer, we should be aware of if we want to get into this space.
I feel like because for GIS it's sort of different, right? Because now it's like we are borrowing information from GIS,
Yeah.
For complexities, they'll always be there because now you have to understand how does this API work. But I feel like it's also general because if you're fetching data from different forms of APIs, you need to understand how does the API work? How do I get to make this API work on my end? Because I feel like the integration bit is where the challenge normally gets in because you have to really sit down, get to read their documentation and get to understand, oh, so this is how I get to, take in the Overpass API and put it in my website. So it's a matter of the complexities are there. The thing that really, I feel like also our mentors, or rather some of the mentors I've worked with, they kept on repeating is in front-end development, you have to always be a reader. You have to learn to be a reader, always. But the beauty about front-end development is codes are always there. So the thing is for you to understand what you're actually doing, what needs to be where, because you get to learn a lot of things. Even some of the big people in front-end development, not everyone knows every code. Okay, I don't know, maybe there's a genius somewhere who does. But to be honest, I feel like not everyone, it is human not to know everything. But for you to know where a documentation is, if you're working with, let's say, React, there are documentation on React, there are documentations on how to get started with React. So as a front-end developer, you need to always read. the complexities are there, but how do you maneuver around the complexities, And also try as much as possible to also try and talk to the people who are also proficient in the industry, because you personally, you can't know everything. At some point, you'll need guidance from someone, right? Try to also seek help. Because personally, I am actually building my own a dummy website. Should I just call it a dummy website? I'm just building my portfolio at the moment because I'm also getting done with the program I've been doing with ALX, and we're required to come up with a project. And the project I'm doing sort of requires me to take in or rather fetch data from OpenStreetMap API, and I have to now sit down and think, I've already built, this is the structure of how I would want my interface to look like. So how do I fetch now this data to make it work? So the complexities are there. So what you need to do, you need to read. You need to work. There's no easy way. Yeah.
Uh, guys, there's no shortcut. You have to read.
There is no shortcut.
As you're working on like the front end bits and the different projects you've handled, is there one that you can single out and be like, oh my God, this is the most complex thing I have ever done? Have you encountered that yet?
To be honest, one thing I really loved about you bringing me on board in this podcast is that as I started with a disclaimer, I'm not really that much of a guru. Yes, I was already familiar with front-end development, but I haven't really built so much. But the beauty is my journey with ALX has helped me build a couple of projects. At least for now, I can say, at the end of the year, I can show my GitHub. The way Spotify releases its Spotify, how's it called? There's also a GitHub wrap at the end of the year. So I'm like, at least this year I would have built things. So I feel like my most complex one is whatever I'm working on right now, because I feel like it's really pushing me a lot out of my comfort zone, because I have to get it moving. I have to also prove to myself that I can do this. So I feel like the one that I'm doing is actually my biggest, to be honest, because I'm just starting out in my JS development. I'll just say I hold the title of a junior JS developer. That I'm really working hard to get to a point where I'm so good at my craft. So I'll say whatever I'm working on right now marks the start of a beautiful adventure in this journey of mine. So yeah, so I think that's what I can even say.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. And we're looking forward. We can't wait to see what you'll achieve. And as you mentioned, even GitHub Draft, I'm just like, maybe we should do like, you see those community challenge where we are like, guys, let's aim to do like a GitHub Wrapped and like push as much as possible to GitHub and see what we can push by the end of the year individually. Because I really like community learning and what that looks like. And as we're coming to the end, Valentine, I'm curious to know, what do you like about your role and how do you see your role evolving over time? I think you briefly touched on, you look forward to, you evolving from junior to getting more in depth into that. But yeah, what do you like about
Yeah.
your role and how do you see that? How would you like to see that evolve over time?
One thing for sure I'll say is I don't like limiting myself. I don't like putting myself in a cage and saying this is where I deeply want to just continue staying. I'm more of that person who is always eager to learn. I'm always that person who is, even when encountered with a challenge, I'll just want to know, how should I maneuver this? I might get to a point and I'm like, I don't feel like this is the path I want to really take in the geospatial development side. And maybe I want to go into data analytics. I'm not really sure, but I'm gonna try. I once had a dream of becoming a good software developer. So I believe that one day I'll be able to make good geospatial web applications, because that's my goal. So yeah, I feel like that's it, honestly. Aside many others.
You've skipped one. So there were two.
Sure.
What was that? And what do you like about what you currently do? And now I've just thought of another one. And what emergent technologies are you excited about?
So for me to get to this side of front-end development, I realized in JS development, there's also this other side of creating data collection applications. There's Survey 123 forms, there's the Kobo toolbox and everything. So I feel like the biggest part I've loved about this JS development side was building these forms, because I didn't even know there are certain form of, should I even call them codes or even syntax to building these things, honestly. I feel like I'm still in that process of getting to a point that I can say I passionately, love this more than the other.
Are you excited about any emergent technology at the moment?
I'm really excited about AI, as much as many people are bashing it, to be honest. It's how you take this technology, to be honest, because if you look at it from way back, we used to waste a lot of time on doing unnecessary things that AI has come and has been able to make these things a little bit easier for us, And one thing I feel like I should maybe tell the audience is AI is not here to replace people. If you don't really have that knowledge of whatever you're doing, AI is really gonna put you in a very bad position, because you'll just be telling AI, do this for me, you're not doing anything. And at the end of it, you have to really work, you know? So I'll say the technology I'm really loving personally is AI, because I get to integrate it with a lot of things. Even let's say on the side of development, on the side of coding, don't let AI build for you your whole code, but let it help you.
Thank you so much, Valentine, for coming to the pod. I've really enjoyed this conversation. And again, we hope to have you back here. Please come back. We'd like to have you here again. We're definitely cheering
Mm-hmm.
on this journey, and we look forward to hosting you here over and over again. Thank you
Thank
so much
you.
for sharing the
Mm-hmm.
nuggets. For the audience, I will plug in any resources that Valentine shares, including the
Mm-hmm.
Pod Connect KE
Yeah.
in the link, and then we can
Yeah.
get to be part of that community. And so once again, thank you so much, everyone. This is the Tech Stack series, episode 2, focused on front-end development with Valentine Irungu. Until next time, bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much.